So, welcome back. I hope everyone had a good break. Before we begin our second plenary, I'd like to just take this opportunity to quickly thank all of our partners and sponsors who do make TT19 possible. It takes place with their generous support, and they are sponsor PTV Group. Partners include the African Development Bank, the FIA Foundation, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, the SLOCAT Partnership on Sustainable Low-Carbon Transport, and we also have session sponsors. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would kindly take your seats. It's very difficult for me to talk over the hubbub. I appreciate your consideration. Thank you. Session sponsors include the UK Department for International Development, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the German organizations, the GIZ, the Bundesministerium für ökonomische Zusammenarbeit, that is the Development Cooperation Ministry, the Ministry of Environment, the Agora Verkehrswende, and the initiative TUMI on sustainable mobility. We're going to be taking this session to do a deeper dive on some of the issues that we addressed in the last panel, and our title is How Will Developing Countries Reap the Benefits of New Mobility? And we want to begin with a brief film that indicates some of the benefits to be had. You'll remember that Makhtar Diop talked earlier about the potential of leapfrogging, and in particular about what drones could offer. And I had mentioned that since its inception, TT19 has been dedicated to putting transport on mobility to the service of development. Well, we have a short film for you now in which you can see how drones are doing exactly that. The World Bank is partnering with the private sector at Lake Victoria to ensure that drones are not only delivering goods, but are delivering crucial material needed for life and death matters. So take a look at the film as an introduction to our session on sustainable mobility and new mobility in developing countries.
East Africa is becoming the hub for cargo drone innovation and testing, from Rwanda's blood delivery project to Malawi's drone corridor. The shores of Lake Victoria are home to over 30 million people, and while the lake brings huge benefits, it also brings logistical problems. Now the city of Mwanza in Tanzania is launching the Lake Victoria Challenge, an annual showcase for the advances in drone cargo delivery, bringing together experts in health supply chains and transportation with cutting-edge global technology in autonomous aerial cargo delivery, providing solutions that can make a difference in the hard-to-reach communities of the Great Lakes region.
These challenges for us are a lot more like opportunity, and we would like to have partners to pilot and see the possibilities to do even medical supplies to remote areas using drones.
Lake Victoria Challenge it's an attempt to push the boundaries both on drone technology and on drone regulations.
It's not the tech per se, but it's the transformative opportunities exciting, the doing things differently, the leapfrogging, the being on the frontier of something. I think that's palpable.
We wanted this to solve the challenges that we have on the islands of reaching our people, hard-to-reach areas.
There is a need for us to leapfrog for the economic development of our country. This is why the government supports this innovation.
I've seen things, I've heard things which maybe I didn't know in the past. So we hope when we go back home, we're going to implement some of the things that we had here, which we feel like they can also help us back home in Malawi.
Airspace is money. Airspace is business. They are bringing about maximization of utilization of the airspace.
In the emergency delivery competition, teams must deliver an emergency package from a drone port in Mwanza to Juma Island, a distance of 20 kilometers. then return and safely land at the point of origin. In the sample collection competition, teams must pick up as many package modules as possible from Juma Island and return them to Mwanza in a set time frame. Several packages may be carried at one time. In the find and assess competition, teams take off from the Mwanza drone port and must successfully identify the GPS locations of multiple markers on Juma Island, then return to Mwanza after completing the survey. Join us at lakevictoriachallenge.org. Keep Africa rising.
So a great example there of public-private partnership and also of leapfrogging. The innovations that we're talking about when we talk about new mobility are often held out as a means for developing countries to leapfrog, to bypass conventional development trajectories into cutting-edge systems like the ones that we've just seen. It's an optimistic picture indeed, but is it an accurate one? As we have discussed in our opening session, there is no one-size-fits-all model when it comes to new mobility. What works in one place will not necessarily work in the same way under a different set of physical and cultural and economic conditions. So in the next hour and a half, we want to drill down on the particular hurdles faced by developing countries that are seeking to reap the benefits of new technologies as they face growing demand for both freight and passenger transport due to rising urbanization, due to burgeoning populations, and due to rapid economic growth. We'll be asking how replicable and adaptable are new mobility solutions like the ones we discussed in the previous panel, and what institutional frameworks, policies, and rules will best enable integration of innovative technologies and business models. And we're also going to talk about finance. What investment and financing approaches will deliver maximum resources for new mobility applications? And to answer those questions, we've put together an excellent international panel spanning both the public and private sectors and civil society. And I will ask them to now please join me on stage, and I'll then introduce them when they're with us. So please, if all of the participants in panel 2 would please now join us on stage, and you'll see your name tags here on the stage, then we can get started. So that one's going to be yours, exactly. That's right. Yeah, perfect. Wonderful. A very warm welcome to all of you. And I'll begin my introductions over here on the, from your perspective, ladies and gentlemen, the left-hand side of our panel. Alioune Badiane is president of the Urban Think Tank of Africa, TUTA. He's a senior urban and regional planner, and he previously served as UN Habitats Director of the Regional Office for Africa and Arab States, and as Habitats Director of the Program Division. Wonderful that you could join us. Thank you so much for being here. And it's a great pleasure to welcome as well Marusha Kardama. She's Secretary General of the Multi-Stakeholder Partnership on Sustainable Low-Carbon Transport, SLOCAT. She has worked with multilateral institutions, national, regional, and local governments and NGOs to develop public policies and projects to advance sustainability. Great that you're here as well, Marusha. Next to her is seated Deokcheon Jang. He's the mayor of the South Korean city of Bucheon, which neighbors Seoul, and he is a lawyer by training. He previously served as a member of Incheon's National Labor Relations Commission and a special advisor for legal matters and human rights to the campaign of President Moon Jae-in. And let me just say that Mr. Jang will be speaking Korean, so you should please get your headsets ready. You will have found headsets on your chairs, and those are to be used now for the translation that we will shortly hear when he speaks. So if you don't, for some reason, didn't find a headset, make sure to get one. We don't want you to miss anything. And Next, it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Solomon Kidane Zegeye. He's Vice Mayor of Addis Ababa and head of Addis Ababa's City Road and Transport Bureau. He's responsible for the overall planning, development, and management of the road and transport system, and he's an expert on the application of intelligent transportation systems technology to boost sustainability. Great that we can have you with us. And I've left Nestor Roa to the last because he is in fact representing our host here on the panel. So forgive me, not intended as a lack of politeness, but simply deference to our guests. Nestor Roa is Transport Division Chief at the Inter-American Development Bank, and he was previously responsible for coordinating operational activity for the Transport Division for Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Before joining the bank, he worked in the private and public sectors in Colombia. So a very warm welcome to you, Nestor Roa. I would like to begin by asking each of you to share highlights of new mobility development and applications in your particular city, country, company, or organization. And particularly interesting, I think, is your take on where you see challenges and potential obstacles. And I'm going to start out with the policymakers on the panel. So I will start out with you, Mayor Zhang. And like many cities in the developing world, Bucheon in the 1970s followed a very car-dependent path. So for the past decade, you have been pursuing a different vision. People-centric is the key part of your strategy. So maybe you can tell us a few successful examples of recent new mobility applications that put people first in Bucheon. Please, go ahead.
Yeah.
The city of Bucheon is located next to Seoul, which is the capital city of Korea. Going through the urbanization, it went through a rapid development, and also it resulted in the crowded traffic congestion and also made a pedestrian road very narrow. So in order to overcome those issues, we adopted a new mobility and we pursued a policy for a people-friendly area. First, in order to create a walking-friendly area, we connected a street, walking trails that connect 200 libraries in the city, and that became people's favorite walking trail these days, and it also improved the quality of life of the people. Also, we now created a waterway that was once covered with concrete to serve as a road for cars. And now this is connecting all the waters and streams that connect 40 kilometers of waterways, and also contributed to reduce the heat island effect, which is environmentally friendly. Next policy is promoting bicycle use. And at every metro station, we're installing the bike station, which rents bicycles and also provides repair services. Also, we're promoting a public transportation system. We adopted an advanced technology which shows a real-time information about the location and what time the buses and taxis will be arriving. So this has been innovative in Korea to promote the use of public transportation for the people. Not only we developed this technology, but we are sharing with developing countries, including Mongolia. And now we are shifting the use of individual car use to the use of public transportation. So nowadays we are focusing on the transit centers, providing more combined, integrated information about the taxis, buses, and metro stations. And this transit has become a very multi-dimensional center. And now we're providing a real-time information about all the public transportations that made people to reduce their waiting time and also reduce the use of individual car use. And the success of this policy was because we pursued a policy that is people-friendly and environment-friendly. Thank you.
Just ask you, if you would, have you faced particular challenges in trying to make this shift to a more people-centric approach? And if so, how have new mobility solutions helped you meet those challenges?
일단
when we pursue these type of policies, the existing, the stakeholders of opposition of the existing policy, their opposition was really hard to address. For example, when we try to shift the concrete and transform into the stream again, when we are trying to do this environment-friendly policy, in that process, the people who were using the parking lot on that area, they were strongly opposed to our environment-friendly policy. But we addressed this issue by creating another parking lot in different areas. So I would say the strong opposition of those stakeholders of the existing policies, that was hard to address. Another example is that when we created this multi-dimensional transit center, as the businesses, the stores around that area had also expressed their strong oppositions. So I had to say the existing stakeholders who had benefited from the existing policies, their opposition was our biggest obstacles in pursuing new environmental-friendly policies.
We'll talk later about how you won them over. But let me now go to Addis Ababa and ask the Vice Mayor to talk perhaps in general about your vision of how new mobility, but I'm particularly interested in Addis Light Rail because, of course, in terms of electrification of public transport, it absolutely has become a showcase project, a model for sub-Saharan Africa. And so one particular aspect, I wonder if you could address it in your remarks, equity and inclusion. That was emphasized in the first plenary by Mr. Sperling, and I wonder if you can just say a word about who's riding the light rail and whether it has improved options and opportunities for the urban poor.
Thank you. Well, first, I would like to say very thank you for the for the World Bank and WRI organization organizing such a conference where we can share the experiences of developed countries as well as the experiences and the challenges of developing countries. I've come from Addis Ababa, from the other extreme of challenges where we have, when we say a developing country or city of a developing country, so we are at the other end of the development where there are the basics are very limited. We don't have sufficient infrastructure in a way where you could take about maximizing the efficiency of the transport systems. In general, we have very poor road networks and very limited also, the coverage is quite low. The supply of electricity, so we've been discussing in a way how we could use electric buses or any vehicles. There, the supply of electricity is quite limited and it's not reliable. The traffic control system is not really matured. Basically, in general, the big challenge which you see there as an example of maybe a low-income country is that the capacity of the institutions to plan, develop all the transport system is quite limited. So whatever technology is developing here in a developed world, it becomes so difficult to readapt it and implement it in the scenarios where we have, because the infrastructure there, which I've been seeing, is quite poor. And the technology, most of the time, although it's so simple, it could be simple, but it's most of the time well developed for scenarios where there is at least basic infrastructure. In such cases, then it becomes very difficult to leapfrog in terms of adapting technologies. And also, the pace of technology development is quite fast, while the pace of institutional development there is very limited. So what we're doing is, in particular, we're planning and developing infrastructures which consider the introduction of electricity, especially the introduction of new technologies that can come easily.
Yep, it's on.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, basically what we're doing is now, since we're developing the basic infrastructures of the city, there we've planned a BRT system just being tendered now. So we're considering a corridor where we can easily shift also to electric buses. For now, we're just developing a simple BRT system, a segregated BRT system using a diesel fuel, but which can easily be shifted also to electric buses. Why we're doing so is, as you may know, Addis Ababa is at 2,200 meters above sea level. That's around 7,000 feet above sea level. Then any diesel buses or diesel vehicles are not efficient because of the low density of oxygen. So there even becomes very worse in terms of energy efficiency, let alone the externalities of the fuel consumption. In that way, so we wanted to shift to electric buses, but yet the maturity of the technology, in particular also the capacity of the city in dealing with such technology, we couldn't really make an easy shift to there. So, and also another investment where we're looking is, we've just set a new strategy for NMT, for non-motorized transport, and there we are now currently developing several non-motorized infrastructure, especially for bikes, so that we can include also other models. So it's better that I maybe stop here. Later I could maybe elaborate.
Come back.
Okay.
Exactly. We'll come back. Let me now jump over to Mr. Badian for perhaps a big picture view, given your expertise on Africa as a whole. And let me ask you both to talk about briefly the opportunities and challenges in regard to new mobility, and then in particular this question of leapfrogging. We saw the drones in the film. The word is thrown around a lot. Where do you see real potential for leapfrogging, and where would you say this perhaps is also so conditioned on prerequisites that are not always present, as in fact the Vice Mayor just pointed out?
Thank you, Melinda. I think Africa is a continent where everything is happening, everything is urgent, and everything has to be done today. It was not yesterday. In so doing, I think there are three imperatives that I would like to set out here with regard to governance, policy regulation, financing, which is all what you are saying. But I will land with the issues of universities and research and education. This is something that I think our focus on transforming transport should give a very strong push, because otherwise Africa will not meet the rendezvous of that. And I will even push for a very strong demand. Why not next year focusing these topics of transforming transport on Africa? And why not even taking it in Africa, where all of you will meet the real challenge? Because I don't think you even have a folk ideas of what is happening there. If I knew that I had an opportunity to make some slide, I will show you some very, very striking slide of women, of children trying to go to school without any possibilities, walking 5 kilometers a day to reach school, to trying to get knowledge in their head. Women going to the market and not having possibilities. Riding on bicycle with 5-6 people on the same bicycle, these are the reality of Africa today. You see, when I hear you talking about pricing, so and that, the last miles, before going to the last miles, you have to start by the first miles. I'm sorry, guys, but the first mile does not exist before you talk about the last miles. You talk about pricing. You talk pricing for those that can afford. Where is the affordability issues? You talk about affordability when there are infrastructure transport. It does not exist. People are walking every day. Do you know that half of African citizens living in cities, the major mean of work is this? Food. Go to Kenya, half of them. Addis Ababa, by the way, 70% are walking into anything. So for me, yes, indeed. Because the biggest revolution in terms of mobility and transport, guess what? It is mobile telephone. It is mobile telephone. And this is helping Africa leapfrog everything. While infrastructure was not existing, Africa today is multiplying by 10, by 20 every year those that have access to telephone and mobile. And they are making business, and they are making everything happen. So that now, when we are moving into leapfrogging, it is necessary for health, medicine, for education, and everything is done in Africa in order to make that reality happen. So, but my invitation before I stop, I invite transportation to transport itself into Africa next year. Thank you.
Very good. Judging from the applause, a lot of people will be there. Many thanks. Let me go now to Marusha Kadama, also for the big picture view. SLOCAT does, in fact, have partners across the globe. You yourself have worked in 33 different countries, if I understood correctly. So perhaps give us your take on new mobility solutions and where you see them being applied in developing countries in ways that you think do address these sustainable mobility for all goals of safety, access, efficiency, and green.
Thanks very much, Melinda, and thanks very much to the World Bank and to the WRI for having me here today. As a newcomer to this sector, to this community, I'm very pleased to be here. Just 3 months in office is a great opportunity to meet you all and make a great friends and future colleagues, I'm sure. I think the word, if I may, is dynamism. It being a challenge and an opportunity. And I say this on the basis of the findings of the Transparent Climate Change Global Status Report that SLOCAT, through its members and through its partnerships, could put together over the past 2 years. Is a document that has not been put together just by my colleagues in the Secretariat. It has actually been the result of contributions from over 100 individuals from 40 organizations, 800 comments during the consultation. So it's given us a bit of a picture of what is out there. And the picture is dynamic, something that is not stopping. Let me just give you some figures and some examples that illustrate a bit how this is going. And let's start perhaps by global bike sharing and realizing that just in 1 year, from 2016 to 2017, it's grown in 33%. And that's a lot. Primarily in Europe, in Asia, and in North America, we have seen the first citywide bike sharing system in Africa, in Marrakesh, follow afterwards in Cairo, for instance. We have seen an explosion of dog bike sharing in Nairobi, though I know I have somebody based in Nairobi here to my right, so he might be grilling me now, telling me that is not true, but that's what we think has been occurring. In terms of car sharing, for instance, the order of magnitude is also huge. The figures we've got are figures from 2016, so probably things have moved quite dramatically since. But it's now operating in over 2,000 cities in the globe, 46 countries across continents. It's 15 million of us sharing a fleet of around 160,000 vehicles. Half of it is in Asia. And actually, China doubles every year the amount of car sharing that is happening there. And also we see how traditional car makers like BMW and Daimler are going into that field, into car sharing fleets in their countries. And we could go on and on and on with ride hailing, for instance, where figures have absolutely exploded. Back to your point, Melinda, about opportunities and challenges, and I'm sure that we will go into more detail, but challenge is regulation, the pace of it, the difficulty that cities are finding in coping with it and finding that middle ground of letting it happen while at the same time accommodating people and looking into safety. And because I come from the world of cities and urban development, I cannot stop talking without saying that we do have a clear challenge that it boils down, I think, to the topic about capacity development that we were just being told. Integration between that transport planning and that urban planning. We don't have that. And as we add more things on the streets, we need urban planners and we need to connect with them.
Thank you very much, and I do want to come back to that point as well. But let me now go to Nestor Roa for the viewpoint of a multilateral development bank and talk a little bit about the challenges of financing new mobility and ensuring reliable public investment streams, as well as leveraging strong private sector participation. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your bank is doing in that area, and again, where you see obstacles and challenges.
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you very much for being here, and I think it's a great discussion. And I think the first thing that we have to do as multilateral development banks is recognize the challenges and the opportunities that we have, and everyone has been mentioning here. And I like to start with just a short reference to the old mobility challenges which were mentioned in the prior panel, but they are old mobility challenges that are still there, like urbanization, urban sprawl, financing problems for public transportation, absurdly increasing increases in car ownership that goes along with income, and that's there, and that's today, and the trend doesn't look any good. No, the trend toward the future, which is a result of incremental adjustments of the old mobility challenge. That I think is the first thing that we need to understand. We need to do incremental improvements in the new mobility, but understand that the new mobility that we are talking about is where does it come from? It comes from new technology, it comes from new business models, it comes from new ways of people relating to each other, among themselves, citizens, and citizens with their governments, and that's just a change that has been happening in a process that has taken several years. We have to understand that artificial intelligence is being around since the 1950s, fast computing in the 60s, 50s. This is a pretty old stuff that is getting together and is getting exponential at the same time. So we are getting really late as a sector to something that is already happening, and that needs to be understood. And that's a challenge. What are the opportunities there? Basically, I'm going to, in the sake of time, and we're going to discuss more on that. This is a big change on the cost structure. What comes to mind is the telecommunications sector, where I came from many years ago, and there to the change of cost in relative of broadband, that was the enabler for 1G, 2G, 3G, and 5G that we are talking about today. So this is really key to understand that we don't know what applications are going to be there, so we need to be very, very, very open. And I will try to get back to the finance in the next question, but it's very important to understand this part, that these new challenges are not that new, and we are kind of late, and we need to change the pattern of marginal increments from the old mobility, take advantage of this new world to try to do, even if there are incrementals in the new technologies, new business models, that should have a leapfrog effect in the other part.
Let me ask you to say a word now about financing, particularly in terms of models that can leverage private sector participation, because we've heard both from the Vice Mayor and also from others in the previous panel about the resource challenges that many cities in developing countries do face. So if you would be so kind as just say a word about what an MDB can do, but perhaps also governments, to try to set up new models to shift risk, perhaps, to work with the private sector to leverage more funds.
Well, I think the words were already mentioned, and it's get the price right, and work on several options that even the citizen, when it's passenger transport, urban mobility, or interurban, or freight, we need to get the price right. And then that's public policy, but that's also leaving a space for entrepreneurial activity to kick in. BRTs came before regulation in the region, no? In Latin American region, and that is also happening with other we need to give room for innovation in order for finance to come in, because if we regulate without understanding well what is going to happen with the mix of this exponential technology and business model, we are going to miss by far. So I think we need to leave some room without regulation, suffer, understand the market failures, and then regulate and put the public policy in charge. And I think the get the price right is the cost, externalities, and all other costs in the cars and in the buses and in the infrastructure. Several examples were mentioned in the prior panel. That's key in order to get the financing, and the multilaterals are there to enhance or to facilitate the introduction of those private funding or public sector funding that can kick in with our support, technical support, jointly with our financing resources.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go back to you, Mayor Zhang, and ask you to talk a little bit both about the regulatory enabling frameworks for the kind of options that you listed off in your first answer. So what did you do in terms of governance and regulation to try to make this shift work? And secondly, working with the private sector, what has been key for you to leveraging private sector participation, and where do the challenges lie there?
The new mobility that we're pursuing in the Bucheon City and the system that people are needed, the participation between private part, the starting point was to identify the needs of the citizens. So through various consultation bodies, we identify the needs of the people, and then we encourage the participation of private sectors. And the rapid development issues that we went through and the speed of the development, all those issues are the challenges that are faced by other developing countries. The system that we're pursuing in pursuing the policies and adopting new mobility, what the strength of our city is not just the finance, but the policy is something that we can share with developing countries. And the private participation was also very crucial. And we also we are also looking for the ways to work with the big businesses that has capability to provide finance in those partnership projects. In every phase, the planning and implementing, we are making sure that we work with private sectors.
Particular steps that were very crucial to getting that private sector participation. What did you do quite concretely to try to bring those companies on board?
When we come up with a policy regarding new mobility, the first step is to listen to the voice of the people, what they need. And research institute, academia, and other private institutions participate in conducting those researches. And to finding out the best ways, we also invite private experts. So in every step, when we implemented the policy, when I mentioned the 3 main policies, every step we worked with private sectors. First, when we address or assess the technical feasibility, we invited private technical experts. It takes time, but we were sure that when we assess the needs, demands of the people, and how we're going to realize their needs, all those processes were pursued in partnership with private sectors. When I mentioned when we restored streams and river, we invited experts from various fields, gardening, environmentalists, and construction experts. So how we are going to realize this people's vision? How are we going to make this people-centric city? We invited experts from every field in the private sectors. And even now, in order to improve the current systems, we are also working with the private sectors. And when I mentioned that we are transferring our knowledge and technology to developing countries, they have a good expertise in terms of persuading the general public. So we're also working with the private sectors in transferring our technologies and knowledge.
Vice Mayor Zagaia, in terms of Addis, I wonder if you could tell us both in terms of financing, what you most need from development partners, where development cooperation is most essential in order to put into place some of the new mobility options that you discussed. And then perhaps also, we never got to the light rail actually in the first answer. So if you would say a word or two about that and whether in fact it is generating the kind of revenues that you were counting on when you originally initiated the project.
On the LRT system in Addis Ababa, it's around 32 kilometers, and at the very beginning when this project was incepted, and we expected it would be around 100,000 passengers per day, but now it's pretty packed. It's more than 150 passengers per day, and where we don't have any stringent control system for people who are paying or not. And somehow it's really working quite well, because it really connects the important areas of the city. And the cost actually per passenger is highly subsidized. And it's very good also that for the audience to understand, for a passenger, for a single trip of passenger, if we request like from 1 birr to around 3 birr, it would mean that equivalently, here if you a single passenger here, it could pay maybe $1, then that could cover a cost of 1 liter of fuel. But there, at least we need 10 passengers to just cover a liter of fuel. So you can also have an equivalence of the electricity cost there. Of course, the electricity is quite cheap. So in terms of revenue collection, it's very low that the government has to subsidize it heavily, because the ability of the public to pay what the market could request is quite not unattractive. In that way, when I relate also this one in terms of the private investors, most of the time they don't really show interest in terms of sharing the cost and also gaining some benefit out of the operation of the transport investment. So we have a modality to work through public-private partnership, but the operational cost cannot be covered through the revenues that can be collected from the public. So in that way, what we do is the government bears the investment of the infrastructure, and also we also continually subsidize the operation of the transport system. This is the way how we work to attract investors. So we have a loan from development partners. We work on loans through the federal government and support through the federal government, while the operations, the city bears it. That's the modality work. But we have seen also some trend in the emerging of these digital technologies, where there is a system like OVR, and which have come into organize these sedan taxis, which we don't have as a government institutions, don't have the capacity to organize them very well. But through such technology, the private has come and they're reaping some benefit out of it, but they're also organizing the sedan taxis in a way that we can really know exactly the operation and the fare. There is some part where we benefit out of such technologies, but of course there is also some challenges, in particular to the major public transport system of the city.
Thank you very much. Just a word on cooperation partners, in particular in relation to capacity building. What would you say is critical there?
Definitely. Well, I think it is to the mayor of Keto, which I think was very well explained. So there is a frequent change of government officers, and as it's been mentioned, that investment in transport takes a lot of time to see the change. So the political gain, in particular, in the investment of transport systems is not well understood, I would rather say. And so the frequent change does bring, officials most of the time really want to have, they want to focus on low-hanging fruit and make a gain in the political arena that way. I think so. This change, I think I would rather say the main cause somehow where you don't see a continued investment in the capacity building of the institutions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Badian, you made a very fervent point about last mile and first mile. So let me come back to that and ask you, what is needed to get better integration of informal paratransit in African cities? It's been an enormous challenge. Those who have tried to do it have not always succeeded. It can create a lot of pushback, even to the point of strikes and open rebellion. So do you have examples for us of best practices in this area that really help to integrate both new mobility first and last mile solutions, but also simply that which is already there, namely those informal shared transport arrangements?
Yes, thank you very much. I think a lot of initiative has been taken in Africa over the last 20 years. We have to recognize it. Don't quote me wrong by saying that first mile and last mile, things that have been done. And today, I think only 6 to 7 countries in Africa has initiated BRTs and then models. I came from Senegal, actually. And then last Monday, government has just inaugurated the first regional express train, they call it TER, T-E-R, which is certainly a brand new model integrating technology, and then because of the dual shift electricity and then gas in case of there is not enough electricity to run the cars. But I think that regional express train is also coupled with the BRT system, going deeper into the neighborhoods and bringing the feeder into the train. The train is supposed to go to the new town and then to go to the new airport that has been built. Certainly in Africa, a lot of effort has been done, and they have to be supported heavily. They have to be financed, as you have been mentioning, financing. We appreciate the support that is done by the multilateral, by the bilateral, like France, like, African Development Bank is coming very strongly, supporting. China has been very strong into support African economies. But you see, the problem is not just the first mile and the last mile, but it's about the policy, it's about the governance, and it is about the social relationship between the infrastructure and the need. And this is where the problem of the resources coming in. African countries are still harboring a lot of poverty. Even the mayor, from Addis Ababa was talking about these resources. But unless these infrastructure are not heavily subsidized, it will be creating a lot of pushback. Today, the problem is how to work the backlog of the infrastructure with heavy financing so that in the coming years, the African countries will get to a stage where they can have real cost operation. Because can the government afford? Because when everything is priority, can you put everything into the infrastructure? Although African countries today require between $90 and $100 billion every year. Every year, $90 and $110 billion every year in order to close the financial gap, the infrastructure gap. Where are the resources? Fortunately, a lot of positive vibes are coming in. African countries are posting 6 to 7% GDP every year. It is positive. But now the problem is the institution, governance, and also how to make the informal sector, give them space, because the new modalities of making everything big parastatal basis is not working. You have to give a chance to those that are in the small sector to have a chance to work with those that are in the major sector so that they have a combined system. So this BRT system, the train and the light rail system, be it in Marrakesh, be it in South Africa, be it in Kenya or Tanzania or in Addis Ababa, are doing fine. But there are still very, very early results that we can post in order to make Africa the cutting edge of transport as we see it all together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Nestor, do you have examples from Latin America where you would say these are good examples that could perhaps also be applicable for some African countries in terms of getting realistic pricing and revenue models in place so that you can move toward transport systems that are sustainable, also in the economic sense?
Well, I think, like I say at the beginning, we don't have, I wouldn't say that we don't have any example that is like working perfectly, because we have been improving marginally in the old mobility. But I think some steps have been taken to price better. For example, in some cases where you are more on the side of restriction of use of car vehicles in some way, you are putting some type of tax that at the very beginning it moves people to the other modes, but the experience there is that that's not sustainable for a very long time because there are other innovations in car financing, not to say the innovations in motorcycle financing that go there and then take the space that you probably have open. So it's very tricky, no? In mobility. I think the examples of the TNC regulation that cities like Sao Paulo, Mexico City, are things that I will try to look. And
you said TNC regulation, in other words, transport network companies like Uber, like Lyft.
Yeah, right. And I think it was mentioned in the prior panel. They are on the right way of putting the charge the right price, but it's not actually promoting more use of that capacity. That is, in most cases, if new capacity, the TNCs, the Uber, the Lyfts are incorporating new vehicles to the system that probably were not there. So the solo driving there is not enough, no, to get the. But I think there is a lot to do. I wouldn't take any particular example like this is the one that you followed.
Thank you, Mr. Badian. You took your microphone. Did you want to say something to that, or?
Yeah, I was just wanted to say that the issues of the pricing is linked to a macroeconomic framework that we need to establish. Unfortunately, today, in many African countries, the new modalities of financing infrastructure development is still depending a lot on the capacities of the country to raise revenues, to be effective, and that is still something that we have to work with the financing institutions. We have to be transparent into our governance system, and often in Africa, the issue of transparency into our investment is a big problem. But if we go beyond, we made the infrastructure policies right, the financing possibilities right, fighting poverty, as the CEO was talking this morning, is at the center of governance, but transport is a key pillar to make that leapfrog to happen. If the transport sector in the investment is not working, if the transparency in the sector is not working, if the integration of both sides of the lower end people and the higher end linked to research and development, we may have a strong time. But the financing should be working on the very clear macroeconomic framework that we need to devise based on transparency and then equitability into access. Thank you.
Marusha Kadama, one of the challenges that many developing countries face is also in the link between cities and the regions around them, the rural regions or those that are in between. And this means also areas that are not densely populated, which is one reason that whole topic of informal transport is so very important. Have you seen good new mobility solutions for that particular challenge?
I don't think I have, personally, and but I would call on all of you to tell me if that is the case. But I do really think, indeed, that there is an opportunity to connect that. If I may pick it up again on the point of urban planning, it's not just urban planning, it's indeed that territorial dimension, that connectivity. But it seems to be that many times we look at these new mobility solutions as aspects just for the very urban citizens, just for that very hardcore urban center without connecting it to the others. So perhaps this could be linked to what the MDBs could be helping us in doing, incorporating new mobility service provision into larger infrastructure projects in a way that we can actually have that balance between avoid, shift, and improved, but also that balance between other infrastructure services that connect their cities as they explode and increase their amount of people and their length to other parts of the territory, to other parts of a given country. I think it's a combination of both things, of really harnessing the potential for the very core of the city and then thinking our infrastructure investment in a balanced manner and inserting these new mobility solutions as part of that larger infrastructure development and how it vertebrates a full territory beyond the city.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask a couple of you to talk briefly about a subject that comes up here that we have already mentioned this morning several times, namely the necessity for a systemic view that really brings together different planners, different policy makers to try to get an integrated system. And I'll ask you, Vice Mayor Zedea, to perhaps talk just a little bit about how you're accomplishing that in Addis. For example, the ERC, the organization that's a state-owned company, as I understand it, that runs the light rail, how closely are they cooperating with other transport agencies to ensure that you do get that integrated approach? For example, bringing in also first and last mile actors. It's on.
So, okay. Well, that's true. So I think for cities like this, it's very important to look into the whole aspect of the transport system in a way, not only in terms of integrating the institutional roles, but in particular the overall response that we have to develop for the transport challenges of the city. In that way, what we've done as a city is, once we learned that there is a whole range of challenges of the transport system, we've understood that we cannot have a high-tech and a high-end transport system without laying down the very basic of the infrastructure and also the very basic institutions that can really deal with it. So what we did is, we're working, of course, with the Ministry of the Transport Minister at a federal level, and then we set a small think tank in a way to lay down what exactly the transport system should be. And so once we laid the whole clear roles and responsibilities of each institutions within the cities and at the federal level, then we established a kind of steering committee when, in a way, we meet together and discuss to really pinpoint exactly the activities that we, in a way, how we could address. So in that way, I think the Ministry of Transport is more or less kind of now looking to provide a federal investment for the transport investment of the city. And in terms of the roles of the development, the city takes care of exactly in terms of prioritizing and developing all the infrastructure and the transport system. This is a kind of a high-level look of in a way how we so far going forward. And now we've also initiated with the Ministry of Transport to have a clear urban transport policy that only doesn't look the city of Addis Ababa, but also the whole secondary cities and also peripheral cities of the country. In that way, now we've reached some good agreement in a way that we will have this policy, and then the investment, the directions can be very clear. I don't know if I'm clear.
Thank you very much. Let me put a question to the panel as a whole, and it is this. What examples or what models or measures have you seen that are effective in promoting that kind of truly systemic integration in the planning process? There's a lot of talk about sustainable urban mobility plans. Who amongst you perhaps has experience where you would say, yes, this is really working out? National urban mobility plans or other vehicles. So anybody who wants to jump in, I see Mr. Badian with his microphone, please, go ahead.
Yes, I want to jump in and then really appreciate what I have seen in Seoul, Korea. It's not from Africa, but it's from the global south. I have been into Korea, Seoul, and I have seen in the last 25 years, roughly, how a city which was really running to disaster has managed to put everything right, integrating all mode of transport system, buses, rails, taxis, everything, even walking. I have seen how the applications from your cell phone is making the difference. And every bus, every taxi system is loaded with a camera. The transport system is so smooth that even if there is an accident in the middle of the highway, the time given to clear is from 5 to 7 minutes. The control system is so perfect that I was really amazed, and I would like to really clap for Seoul, Korea for an experiences that I would like all developing countries to visit and to see. I'm a planner, and I have seen also what they have done into the Chachangi, and then bringing back at the middle of Korea what is really people for cities and not cities for people. You know? People for cities, cities for people is a binom that have been working very well. Of course, it is not something that has been done without regulation. It has been very strong regulation, very strong policy, very strong consultative action between people and the municipality and government, and this is something that I would like to give as an experiment to see. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Let's go straight away then to Mr. Jang to find out how that was possible. Bucheon, of course, is a satellite city of Seoul. I haven't been there. I've been to Incheon and was deeply impressed as well by the public transport system that I saw. So perhaps you can tell us, what was the institutional vehicle that allowed for that kind of a systemic approach to work? What is it that you did that other cities might learn from?
To the two panelists that they have experienced visiting Korea, I appreciate that. And Bucheon is located between Seoul and Incheon. If I give you a snapshot, each city has its own organizational structure, systemic approach, and it's a it's not a municipality. It is a municipal city, but it is not a metropolitan city. But it is not confined to one small city, because citizens of Bucheon will commute to Seoul and Incheon as we work together to establish those transportation system. We have to work together with other cities such as Seoul and Incheon. We have established those systems too. And when we establish a railway, and the Seoul has its own corporation, while Bucheon doesn't, and Incheon has its own railway corporation in its municipal system, and from the planning stage, how we should distribute the railway system and what the central government should do in connecting Seoul, Incheon, and Bucheon or other smaller cities. They will gather all the policymakers from different cities, and they will value economical value and where the railway should be planted to make sure that the maximum number of people can benefit from that. So the railway distribution or the layout is decided based on those information too. Seoul and Incheon have rapidly developed, and population concentration is known to be the greatest in the world. Bucheon has about 16,000 per 1 square kilometers, very close to that of New York, if not greater than that. So each person has his own means of private vehicle, private transportation. But how can we offer some public transportation even to those people, and particularly for those marginalized people who do not have any means of private transportation? That has been the two parallel priorities as we pursued our policy. Compared to your view or your understanding of other areas when it comes to transportation, collaboration has been very, very excellent, even between the central and the local governments and between different local cities. This systemic view and the implementation of such has been very successful. Because of that, we have facilitated a very convenient environment where concentrated growth has been possible. Last year, South Korea's per capita income exceeded $30,000 US. So we really pulled through a very rapid economic development, and we have accumulated a lot of know-how, and Bucheon is a case in point. And through this rapid economic development, we are willing to share that experience with developing nations, particularly our colleagues from Africa. Our experiences with Bucheon when it comes to bus information or the railway system, as we already shared it with countries like Mongolia, we are very willing to share it with countries in Africa when it comes to broader transportation system, the systemic view and the consultation approach, and how we joined or had the private sector on board in our consultation is something that we are willing to share. And I am so humbled by your kind words and compliments. And we are very, very willing to share this with other partners across the world. Thank you so much.
Usha has her microphone in hand, so perhaps you have some thoughts on that.
I have it, Melinda, because you mentioned sustainable urban mobility plans. And I thought that it was worth sharing with our colleagues here some figures again. There's 800 of those out in the world out there. But it's fundamentally dominated by Europe, where they are happening. And it's just 10 countries. So what is it that we are not doing right to actually increase the number of sumps out there and get it out of that geographical footprint that we have out there. And again, it boils down to capacity, and it boils down to bringing, sorry for being a broken record, but bringing the different streams together. There where we have things, where we have seen things working is because they're going back to the very, very basics. They're going back to transit-oriented development. They're going back to placing their stations there where, you know, it makes sense to do it in terms of moving people and connecting them. And it's also where they are looking into public space. And when we talk about new mobility, public space, just simply having a part of the street where you can walk safely is essential. And by looking into that, we are connecting it with something that I haven't heard so far coming up in the panel, which is gender. When you talk about safety, public space, a proper area of the road and the streets to be able to walk with your new mobility device, if you're a woman, that becomes even more important. So I think that a call for all of us as practitioners to try to see what is going on, that we are not taking it to other parts of the world and connecting it with the very basics of our sector.
Thanks very much. And you'll be glad to know we are talking about safety and access in our next plenary, so we will definitely pick up there on the gender aspects. What I'd like to do now is just take a couple of audience questions. We started a bit late, so we're going to be running a bit over time, but I'll try not to cut too far into our lunch break. Do we have 2 audience questions for the panel? If you don't leap up soon, I'm just going to okay, if you'll go to the mic there in the middle, that'd be great.
Hi, so I had a very general question for the panel. Once you have implemented a certain strategy of some kind, right, whether it's new mobility or traditional mobility, how do you measure the performance and the success of that strategy?
Thanks very much. Let's take the next question as well, and then we can get a bundled kind of an answer. Go ahead.
Yeah. My question is about jobs.
Could you go closer to the mic? It's.
My question is about jobs, I would say. How do you think that jobs in the transport sector can be influenced by new mobility? Because I think this is an important issue in cities in developing countries. Transportation is providing a lot of jobs, decent jobs to the people. What is going to happen?
Okay, so let me ask, first of all, who would like to address the first one about measuring gains, measuring economic value? Who would, sure, Mr. Badian, do you want to speak to both, maybe, briefly?
Yes, no. Look, the efficiency is measured by 2 criteria. The ability to integrate, to be integrating those that are on the lower end, and the ability to pay back if you have taken a loan in the long run. Because if you are not able to sustain your loan that are building the road, you won't be able to sustain the gain and the more. But integration is the key word linked to efficiency. In terms of jobs, I think building industries, transport system is something that can create a lot of jobs, because it is a vital sector for the economy. Yeah. An economy that is not linked up, providing facilities, mobilities to education, to health, and to food, and linking up to even public space on safety is not sustainable. But there are a lot of possibilities that we can offer. If we open up the spectrum, not just focusing into the high end of the sector, but also integrating the social, integrating the environment, you can create a lot of jobs within the sector. But that possibilities has also to be worked up with the possibility of pricing, with the possibility of affordability, with the possibility of accessibility. Thank you.
Well, especially in a way how to measure the impact of this strategy for us, for the city of it's in particular, if you see the data of the city of Addis Ababa, the number of trips per day is almost 1.25. So the trip length in the city of Addis is not more than on average 11 kilometer. And this number does show me that the society is completely immobile, and the mobile society could reflect what it would mean on its economic activity. So as the city of Addis Ababa, we want to increase the number of trips that could be done per day, and as well as the length of the trip, that could be covered in the city. In that way, if the transport system gets better and better, so we expect people to be very mobile and make sure that they have a higher number of trips per day. So people doesn't only move to their work and back home, but also for other activities in a day, so that they become mobile. These are elements in a way where we want to look whether the transport system is going to be impactful or not. And the second question in particular, that's a typical actually question that we often get asked when we're making decisions on the transport system in the city. We have these minivans, very small, that can carry only 12 people. They call it Matatu, Dalala, whatsoever, different names they have. They have got different names in different African cities. And we have a strategy that we want to move to a mass transport system. And people do complain that, okay, you're getting rid of many drivers out of the economy, you're making them basically out of job. Always when we much focus on the number of implements that we can create in the transport system, somehow we kill it. Personally, I believe that if we could make the transport system much efficient, then the economy by itself that would be generated will create other job opportunities that would rather benefit us much more than simply focusing on an inefficient transport system that will just create job opportunities only for drivers and few kind of managers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roa.
Yes, to relate to the jobs question, I'm very, very optimistic because I think, going back to understanding what's happening, this is a big reduction in cost. Let's take data. A normal planning study for a city could be in the $1 million tag or around something like that. A lot of that cost comes from gathering data. Gathering data with the new technology is getting very, very inexpensive. That's the part that probably is going to be impacted. But then you have a relative value that is increasing and it's judgment. Judgment and professional value, how do you interpret that data? That is going to get more valued. Also, you need more additional skills to be able to do that. So I'm pretty optimistic. It's going to be a change, but I think it's going to be for the good and the well-being of the employers of the future.
Thanks very much. Skills, of course, is the main subject of our last plenary tomorrow, so we'll be picking up on that. Mayor?
Yeah,
how we measure the success of the strategies. Regarding the question, in case of Bucheon City, when we implement, as a mayor's perspective who makes and implement a policy, I would like to focus on the marginalized people and how satisfied actually people are. So we would like to try to figure out the actual figures that we measure the satisfaction of the people and how much we include those vulnerable people, like marginalized people. So we are conducting survey and gathering the data on that area. So that is the part that I'm also putting my focus on assessing the success of the policy.
No, last word, but I just wanted to pick up on the employment question, and I wanted to bring in two dimensions. I'm going to do it quickly because standing between people and lunch is never a good idea.
Right.
So a word, informality, and another word, gender. So when we look into employment opportunities, we shouldn't miss the point that in the vast majority of the cities we are trying to bring these new mobility solutions, there are secondary cities where the bulk of the employment is happening in informality. We don't need to demonize it, but we need to better understand it because we are somehow adding yet another layer of complexity to the panorama of informal work, which is 90% of the job creation in Africa, for instance, isn't it? And then gender. I wanted to just illustrate the potential of gender and employment in this new mobility world by bringing in an example from the World Bank electromobility report, the Tempos in Nepal, the small vehicles that actually started shifting from fuel to electric batteries simply because of fuel scarcity. And thanks to a set of policy measures that accompanied that movement, they've ended up in Nepal, thanks to these Tempos, having 60% of the drivers being female, being women, and a significant ownership by women entrepreneurs. So there is the possibility of connecting the employment in the new mobility sector to critical things like gender empowerment and informality in the developing world. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Thanks to all of the panel.